Hello and a very warm welcome to a brand new edition of India's World with me, Rausan Pereira on Rajya Sabha television. Crores of Pakistanis are preparing to vote in a general election on Wednesday after a campaign tainted by violence and dominated by political controversy. What happens in this South Asian country of nearly 20 crore people matters to India, the US and other major players in the region. Since its independence in 1947, Pakistan has oscillated between civilian and military rule. This election will mark the second time that one civilian government has handed power to another after serving a full term, a historic landmark. But few in Pakistan are celebrating the strength of its democracy. The run-up to the vote has been marked by tensions between the incumbent Pakistan Muslim League-Nawaz party and the military. PML-N complains of a targeted crackdown by the powerful security establishment with the alleged help of the courts. Nearly 17,000 party members are facing criminal cases over breaking unspecified election rules. On this edition of India's World, we will analyze the significance and consequences of the election in Pakistan. Joining me on the program today are Sharat Sabharwal, former High Commissioner to Pakistan, Major General Ashwani Siwach, retired defence expert, and Professor Pant, Head Strategic Studies, ORF. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of India's World. Ambassador, let me begin the program with you. Your take on the elections in Pakistan.
Well, as you rightly said, 2013, when the election took place and a civilian government handed over power to another on completing its term, there was hope that finally democracy was perhaps taking roots in Pakistan. That hope has been belied. Now, as you said, a civilian government has again completed its tenure, although the Prime Minister had to be changed in between. And it would be in name handover of power to another civilian government. But whatever has preceded this election does not make for any kind of stable democracy in Pakistan. In fact, it's a step back from what had been achieved through the 2013 election. The way the PML-N has been targeted, selective accountability, Nawaz Sharif's conviction through a trial at a lightning speed, which is unusual for Pakistan's judicial system. And then many things that have happened on the side. Attempts to break up his party. The army couldn't bring about a big breakup in his party, but did engineer defection of a number of members, especially in southern Punjab, targeting of the media, independent journalists, intimidation, and then of course elements of religious extremist parties who have come to the field to contest elections. All this doesn't make up for consolidation of democracy in Pakistan.
Sure.
I think it's a step back.
Okay. General, are we seeing a new phase of Pakistani politics emerging now?
Possibly a very different situation is taking place. Now, as we are aware of that, what is happening is that in last 70 years of Pakistan history, the majority of the time, the military was ruling. Whenever the military was not ruling, they were having a weak government wherein they can have the say. Now, a situation which has come now as on today, they wanted that a weak government, a puppet government should come into power.
So whoever the next Prime Minister will he be a puppet at the hands of the military?
Absolutely correct. That is how they are ensuring. To run up to the whatever is being done now, the actions speak by itself. What they have done is they knew that Nawaz Sharif was trying to get very popular and he was trying to get in very close to India. That was not liking to the deep state, and that's how they have removed him. And now they are thinking that possibly Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, Imran Khan will play the way they will like. So therefore they are now popping up. There is a nexus which has been established between Pakistan Army and judiciary. To some extent, even the media is been motivated. So all this thing has been orchestrated in a manner that the government which come into power should be weak, should be, if possible, headed by Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf Imran Khan, and if possible, it can be hung parliament. The reason is very obvious. The Pakistan Army want to have say as far as defense policy and the foreign affairs are concerned. They want to keep it with themselves. They want the defense budget to be into their liking. They want the threat toward the eastern border, toward India remain there, so that their relevance remains there. So therefore, the interference in election has not been to that much as has been done now. Another very strange thing is taking place. Mainstreaming the basically you can say militants into election. What happened is about 180 to 200 terrorists basically of Lashkar-e-Tauba, Jamaat-ul-Dawa and Tehreek-e-Labbaik. They are banned under Pakistan anti-terror law on 4th schedule because they were found involved in terrorist activity and sectarian violence.
Okay.
However, they have given a waiver and they are all contesting. So therefore, a very good idea of now what they have done is mainstreaming all these religious militants.
Okay.
So a very strange situation is emerging, which is not good for the democracy, not good for the South Asia.
Professor, General is calling it a strange situation in Pakistan. How would you call it? And also, let's look at the contenders this time around. There's Shahbaz Sharif, there's Bilawal Bhutto, and there's Imran Khan, of course, who's expected to be the next Prime Minister of Pakistan. And of course, there are the others, Hafiz Saeed and his party and the others as well. Where do they all stand?
Well, at this moment, it seems it is a contest between Imran Khan and Nawaz Sharif. And I think people perhaps are being premature in sort of judging the outcome. It is very much possible that Mr. Sharif and his party holds on to a significant chunk of their base in Punjab, and I think that would complicate matters going forward. So one thing I think which both other panelists have also pointed out, and I would put it slightly differently, is that perhaps the Pakistani military, recognizing the challenge it faces when it dominates Pakistani politics very overtly, has learnt its lesson. It's now running the country through the back door. And I think this argument that elections, which was happening in 2013, which we recognize as strengthening of democracy, perhaps recognizing the long-term damage or challenge that it poses to the military's very strength in the country, they've sort of chosen a very convenient route for them. So in that sense, what they've done, they've seemed to have shaped the electoral battlefield in their favor, so that the outcome is rigged in their favor. And I think that is perhaps one lesson that we learn from this election, is that institutionally Pakistani democracy has gotten weaker over the last 5 years with whatever has been done to the mainstream politicians, especially to Nawaz Sharif, and I think and to his party now. And then the trend of putting up people who perhaps, like Mr. Imran Khan is being talked about as army's candidate, or other mainstreaming of terrorists. I think so the kind of terrain that they had set out in these elections, I think holds perhaps tells us that there are difficult times ahead, both in terms of Pakistani democracy and institutionalization of that, as well as how that will impact its neighbors.
Indeed, talking about the neighbors, Ambassador, how is the election going to impact? We'll talk about India a little later in the program, but how is it going to impact the neighbors? Who do you think is China's candidate? What do you think of Afghanistan, and how is Afghanistan looking at this election, really?
Well, frankly, if you ask me, in terms of outcome, whatever the outcome, it's going to be more of the same in Pakistan. Let me explain why. The stranglehold of the army has been there all along. We spoke of, the army shaping a government of its own choice after this election. The fact is that even when Nawaz Sharif, who has been resisting the hold of the army, was the Prime Minister, the security and foreign policy was essentially being run by the army. Now, what will change is that resistance which Nawaz Sharif was offering every now and then, that will disappear, because whoever becomes the Prime Minister will be beholden to the army and will act according to, will toe their line. But the basic fact of army dominating the polity within Pakistan, that will remain unchanged. So therefore, not much is going to change in terms of, how the neighbors look at it. You asked me about China. I think China's interest in stability within Pakistan has deepened manifold over the last 5 years or so because of the investment that they have made in Pakistan. So they would be hoping that whatever happens, it contributes to stability within Pakistan. But I don't think they would have any worries about who comes to power, because they have a very good relationship with the Pakistan army.
Indeed, and they are the ones who call the shots at the end of the day, so that's something that China doesn't have to worry about. Talking about the army, talking about the military, General, what's the end game as far as the army is concerned?
See, army is very clear in mind that they must have a government which is slightly weak, which is be pliable by the army, because they want to hold their defense and external paths with them. They are knowing it that two things are happening now in future. One is Afghanistan. Pakistan is a frontline state for Afghanistan. A solution, if it has to come, Pakistan will play a major role. So, in case the army has a say, automatically it will be beneficial to Pakistan. We all know that what is happening in Afghanistan is now the Taliban is the one which is emerging the front runner. And America, John Nicholson has come and told that we are ready to directly speak to you. So therefore, what is shaping there as far as Afghanistan is concerned, it looks like that there will be a direct talk between America and Afghanistan, where Pakistan will also play a major role. You know, recently they had their foreign affairs, representative joining them in Afghanistan. So therefore, as far as Pakistan is concerned, in case if it is a weak government or a government headed by Imran Khan, who is there now prodigy, which has been brought, it will be beneficial to them. They will do it what they want. And my point today is that they want to be very strong. They should take a call on defense and all. They were saying that the defense budget should not be reduced. Cross-border terrorism, as far as India is concerned, will continue. It may increase. So as far as India is concerned, in case the elections are what will come, in case Imran Khan comes as a prime minister and he plays what Pakistani army wants, the relation may deteriorate further, and cross-border terrorism, which is our biggest challenge, will increase in days to come. So we have to be alert and live on that issue. As far as China, what we were saying is absolutely correct. China-Pakistan economic corridor, $50 billion has been invested by China there, and they want stability there. I don't know how the stability will come, but that is the main thing, because whether it is going to Khyber Pakhtunkhwa or Balochistan, all these areas are disturbed area, and they want stability so that the investment which is done by Chinese goes in a big way.
Sure.
So therefore, overall, what it looks like that a situation which is going to merge is going to be very fluid. However, whosoever come into power, it is the army which will call the last shot, because they have mastered this technique of not governing themselves, having all authority without responsibility. And they will continue that.
So the army will call the shots at the end of the day, no matter what happens on Wednesday, is what the general is suggesting. Talking about India, since India was brought up, Professor, how should we look at the elections in Pakistan, and what is the outcome that will suit us best?
Well, of course, you know, we would like, we would also in some ways like stability in Pakistan, and we would like a government that actually governs Pakistan, so that there are the problems that, you know, cross the borders that does not happen. But I think, given our history, we know that that is something that if Pakistani army which has traditionally used terrorism as an instrument of state policy, if that continues to call the shots, as it's very likely to happen, then I think it's very unlikely that that policy will undergo a change. So I think by and large it will be more of the same. But if there is a government in place, a civilian government that believes, because of whatever reasons, because of China, that governance is important, and I think if you look at what Mr. Imran Khan has been saying, at least rhetorically, that governance is important, that what Pakistan lacks is governance. So I think if at all the new government starts focusing on governance, then I think there is a possibility of some kind of an dialogue happening between the two sides. Of course, we will have our own elections next year. So only after that, perhaps when there's a new government in Delhi, they can look at Pakistani positions and Pakistani government. But I think in the meantime, I'm afraid it looks to me that it's going to be very fluid and very unstable environment, because if there is a coalition government, by definition that government is going to be weak, that government is going to be at the mercy of the army. And by definition, what has happened to Mr. Nawaz Sharif, I think one lesson that has been learned very categorically is that you cannot cross swords with the army. So therefore the conclusion that anyone would reach is that we have to keep army in good stead, and the India policy, which traditionally has been army's domain, will continue as it is. So I think India perhaps would be best served by sort of having a more strong defensive orientation, whereby we are protective of our defenses and where we are defending against Pakistani aggression on the border. But beyond that, I think it's largely Pakistan's, as we have often said, it's the inability of Pakistan to get its own house in order. That's a real problem in South Asia.
Sure. So, going forward, then we need to be wary of what Pakistan could possibly do, and also we need to watch our backs, is what you're suggesting. Ambassador, when there's a new government in Pakistan, do we look towards a dialogue maybe? Do we open the doors to the military directly, since the military is calling the shots, puppeteering a government in the forefront?
Well, as I said earlier, if it's going to be more of the same in Pakistan, it's going to be more of the same for us also, which is a civilian government which doesn't have the real power, which looks over its shoulder every time it makes a move towards us, and the real power remains with the army. Now, as to your question whether we should talk to the army, it's suggested from time to time. I have a view. I believe we should certainly talk to the army, to other stakeholders, whoever is willing to talk to us, when it comes to managing the relationship. Managing the relationship, bringing down levels of violence, bringing a degree of calm to the relationship. But if the intention is to talk to the army to change the nature of the relationship from an adversarial relationship to a cooperative relationship, I am afraid this approach has serious limitations, because the worldview of the army hasn't changed. So two realities in Pakistan, if they don't change, the worldview of the army doesn't change and they continue to have a stranglehold over the Pakistani polity. That means trouble for us. Institutionally, they regard an adversarial relationship with India as in their interest. In terms of sustaining various terror groups and so on, using them against India, that policy hasn't changed. So unless the worldview of the army changes, to expect that talking to the army would be useful for changing the nature of the relationship, that I think would be an overstated option. But certainly for managing the relationship we should. But I think moving forward, instead of expecting a fundamental change in the Pakistani polity, I would look for two things in the results of these elections. One is, what kind of vote do the religious parties get? Look, traditionally the religious parties have not done well in Pakistan. Now, if they get a noticeable percentage of vote this time and a noticeable number of members in the National Assembly, that's bad news for Pakistan, that's bad news for the region. The second, I would, in spite of all that has been done to PML-N, the field has been tilted against them. As my co-panelist said, we shouldn't jump to any conclusion. Let's see what happens. Nawaz Sharif remains very popular. So I would be looking very carefully at the vote that his party gets. Because that would be an indication that at the very least people who vote for him do not regard his anti-army stance as a reason not to vote for him, at the very least.
Right.
Let's not even regard it as an endorsement of his anti-army stance, but at the very least not a reason not to vote for him.
Sure.
I think those two things would be important to look for. Beyond that, I don't think the realities would change much.
Okay, the reality as far as Pakistan is not going to change much going forward is what the ambassador is suggesting. But one aspect that I wanted to raise with you, General, is the fact that how the army has managed to sway the judiciary as well in its favor, something that we've noticed over the last few months. I mean, are you surprised at all with that?
No, it is quite surprising. See, earlier what was happening, the judiciary under a lot of pressure also in Pakistan was following an independent line. Of late, what has happened is that has become a part of deep state. Now you know it, Justice Siddiqui, that he in basically High Court of Lahore has openly said there is a lot of pressure which is coming of ISI and interference in their day-to-day working. And he categorically said that there is a pressure on them in giving judgment in favor of in certain cases, and also to ensure that Nawaz Sharif and Maryam Nawaz stays in jail without getting bail up to 25 July. So this has been already now said that the investigation to be carried out. I am sure this investigation is going to be eyewash. My point of taking is a very different thing. When we were talking about army, will anything change? I said that why it will not change it. The direct perception of Indian army and Pakistan, Indian state and Pakistan army differ on Jammu and Kashmir. As far as Pakistan is concerned, they consider it is a freedom movement. Whereas we have been telling there is no problem in Kashmir, it is a cross-border terrorism. It aided and abetted by Pakistan, and as far as other problems are concerned, it is a problem of governance which can be resolved domestically by India. But so far Pakistan keep on interfering, keep on sending terrorists across border, nothing can be resolved. So therefore, until and unless Pakistan recognize that cross-border terrorism is the main reason for not having good relation with India, then only we can move forward. If he keeps on talking that good terrorists, bad terrorists, keep on sending Lashkar-e-Toba and Jaish-e-Mohammed, we will stay there only because no progress can be made. And we are very well in, as far as Kashmir is concerned, we are well orchestrated there, we are well guarding as far as the line of control is concerned and hinterland. So therefore, Pakistan had to change its stance. In case it want to have good relation with India, and let us say the new government which comes want to genuinely start with a clean slate, things can move provided they are ready to accept the ground reality that it is a cross-border terrorism which is an irritant between the relation between India and Pakistan, nothing else.
All right. Professor, I'm going to go back to a point that the General was making earlier in the program about granting legitimacy to religious outfits and militant outfits. Is that a concern for us?
Yes, I think the mainstreaming of these groups, which are quite extremist in their approach, which not only about the nature of Pakistani state going forward, but also their interactions with India and the kind of language, and Hafiz Saeed is going around and campaigning. And I think that shows a certain mindset which perhaps the military feels that it is instrumentally useful in the short term. Without again recognizing what they have done in the past, that by using such groups they also create problems for their for domestic Pakistani society and politics. But I think that idea that somehow these groups are instrumentally useful vis-a-vis India or then vis-a-vis Afghanistan is is ultimately a function of the paranoia that you see in the Pakistani army about India, and the sense of that their raison d'etre is about and is anti-India, and therefore that feeling of anti-India should continue to define not only Pakistani army but the Pakistani state. So the more we will see such groups, as I think as the ambassador pointed out, in the Pakistani legislature, the more we'll have to worry. I think he's right that we have not seen traditionally a large number of such groups winning. But I think again, we don't know the kind of work, the kind of heft that the military is putting behind such groups at this point in time. And therefore, the outcome may be very surprising, if at all, if we find that a large number of these do get elected. Then I think that will be a cause for us to worry, because that is not simply a question of Pakistan's future, but that's a question of how then Pakistan interacts with India over the long term.
Right.
In the short term, as we have all said, it will be more of the same. But if you want to believe in a future that is beneficial for both of us, then I think we need to believe in an idea of Pakistan that perhaps can be more inclusive of what Pakistan is, but also what India stands for.
All right. Closing comments now from all my guests, starting with you, Ambassador, talking about the future. What does the future have in store for Nawaz Sharif?
All that I can say, there are now reports coming that his health is not good. Look, he's in the last phase of his political career. It's his daughter's future that is more important, and the daughter, like her father, connects very well with the people. I think this is the strength of Nawaz Sharif and Maryam Nawaz. I don't think they are done with. I don't think they are written off. As I said, we'll have to see what kind of vote they get. That would be an indication, in spite of all the intrigues against them, if it's still a sizable chunk of the vote, appreciable chunk of the vote, even if they don't win a majority or even come close to a majority, that would be an indication that people still stand by him. So he will be there somewhere in future. His politics will be there in future. Through him, through his followers, through Maryam Nawaz. What happens in the immediate future, we don't know. But
Sure.
what has happened in Pakistan is that a politician, Nawaz Sharif was disqualified earlier by the same judiciary.
Right.
And then the disqualification was removed.
Okay,
So
I'm
who knows?
running out of time, Ambassador, so I'm sorry to cut you short there. General, are you surprised with the level of violence that you've seen this time around to the run-up to the elections?
Absolutely correct, because you know people are not liking it. You see, what they are saying that yesterday PML-N has gone in front of ISI and Army Headquarter Office, and they are chanting, "Ye do dasat gardi hai, ye ek vardi hai." Vardi means that this terrorism is been state sponsored by Army. So they are already openly challenging that. Now the people are started challenging whatever the state sponsored terrorism which been spread by ISI and Army. So as on today, why it is going at two reasons. One is that they are trying to favor Pakistan PTI of Imran Khan out of way. Second thing, that the religious militants which were otherwise barred from contesting election, they have been now brought into the mainstream.
Okay.
That these are the two regions where people are not liking.
Okay.
Another point which we are trying to, Nawaz Sharif has taken a bold game. He has taken a gamble of coming back to Pakistan, because by coming back, he will get a sympathy vote.
All right.
So he is
Professor-
not done away.
Professor, close the show for us with your concluding remarks on whether we are going to see more of this in the days to come, people taking to the streets, you know, protests, violence, and all of that.
I think if there is, if the vote, for example, turns out to be convoluted, if the vote turns out to be very dispersed, I think if, for example, we see Nawaz Sharif doing well in Punjab, that changes the game, because then that means that's where the power center in Pakistan as far as Pakistani politics is concerned. So I think if we see that those trends emerging in Punjab, I think we are likely to see greater instability in Pakistan over the next after these elections.
Okay, with that, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of India's World. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. You can share your feedback with us as well. Our email ID is on our screens right now, indiasworld.feedback@Rajya TV. And you can also, of course, share your feedback on Twitter as well. The handle's flashing right here. That's it from me. See you again next time.